Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Going to get into some news items. The stepping down of a very prominent Southern Baptist pastor and president of a Southern Baptist seminary. We'll talk about that in just a minute. A little bit more evidence that some individuals really do want to confiscate your guns. We'll get into that. Also, some signs pointing to a counterintelligence operation deployed against the Trump campaign. We don't talk about that too often because as the evidence comes in, we talk about it, but some talk shows probably talk about it too much, and there are other things that affect your faith, your family, and your freedom. Also, the Trump administration has decided to cut funding for abortion providers. We'll talk about that. And, of course, a decision that was made earlier this month in May about sports gambling and where that might lead. NFL and Major League Baseball and others are saying they really do want to prevent sports gambling, and we'll talk about that as well. So lots to cover in this first hour or so, and then a little bit later we'll have a chance to talk with Dan Seeley as we talk about the national debt. And for those of you that can listen in the third hour, we do not broadcast on our local station there, either in Texas or in Minnesota, but certainly you can listen online to the interview we're going to be doing with John Smirik on the politically incorrect guide to immigration in the third hour. So lots to cover, but let me take a story that actually broke just a few hours ago, and that is the prominent Southern Baptist leader Paige Patterson, who's an individual that we certainly know around the round table, was removed from his job as the president of Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary amid a kind of an evangelical Me Too movement. And this has been kind of a backlash from a number of women, not only in the Southern Baptist Convention, but others, many of whom, by the way, have been on the program with us. If you're not familiar with some of that, I might just point you to the May issue of the Point of View Outlook magazine, which talks about the Me Too movement and also raises some questions about it as well. But according to a brief statement that came out earlier today, I don't think they made the final decision until 3 a.m. this morning, if I remember right, the seminary's board of trustees made him president emeritus, quote, for the benefit of the future mission of the seminary, unquote. Now, he will receive compensation. And after about 13 hours of closed-door sessions, the seminary trustees appointed Jeffrey Bingham as the seminary's dean of the School of Theology as the interim president. Nick Pitts, who normally is with us but is on his way to Washington, D.C., or maybe he's already arrived, said while the board was in session yesterday, news broke that Patterson allegedly encouraged a woman who has said she had been raped not to report it to the police. He then allegedly told her to forgive her assailant. When this story went live, even some people that have supported Paige Patterson decided to back off. And, of course, there have been other stories as well. So wanted to cover that for those of you that are familiar with the Me Too movement and some of the questions surrounding Paige Patterson and Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. Might say this happens right now when you have the various Southern Baptists in the Dallas area. So we'll see what transpires over the next day or so and give you some more coverage later on. Just before we take our first break, though, I wanted to do something that I try to do from time to time, and that is to help you learn a little bit of discernment. There are ways in which sometimes people play with words. They use semantic differences so as to hide their real intention. You, of course, see this in a criminal law. You see this in juries and in court testimony and all sorts of things. You know, you'll ask, did you have an accomplice with you? No. And then later on, they'll prove that he had an accomplice. So they'll say, well, yeah, but he wasn't with me. He was in the car. And so you get this kind of finely grading the terms so that you kind of portray something that really isn't there. And I saw that play out last night, and this piece by Beth Branham kind of goes into more detail, because if you have USA Today, there was an op-ed that was penned by one of the members of Congress, Eric Swalwell. And Eric Swalwell is from California, Democrat, and he actually proposed what most people would call a gun confiscation plan. Here, reading directly from the op-ed in USA Today, he says, reinstating the federal assault weapons ban that was in effect from 1994 to 2004 would prohibit manufacture and sales, but it would not affect weapons already possessed. This would leave millions of assault weapons in our communities for decades to come. So he said, instead, we should ban possession of military-style semi-automatic assault weapons. We should buy back such weapons from all who choose to abide by the law, and we should criminally prosecute any who choose to defy it by keeping their weapons. The ban would not apply to law enforcement agencies or shooting clubs. Okay, got that. So last night on Tucker Carlson, he actually brought Representative Swalwell on the program, and again, interestingly enough, Tucker Carlson said, you say that the U.S. government ought to ban certain species of rifles. You wrote a piece about this. It's not a secret view we have. You wrote it in USA Today. You say we should ban possession of military-style semi-automatic assault weapons, so we confiscate this entire class of firearms. So what do we think would happen if the government tried to do that? And Swalwell comes back and said, well, Tucker, did you read the op-ed? And he said, I did. I just quoted from it extensively, and you've heard me quote from it as well. Well, again, Representative Swalwell says, I'm not calling for confiscation. What I'm saying is we should invest in buyback, and we should restrict any weapons that aren't bought back to gun clubs, hunting clubs, shooting clubs, and ranges. Keep them there where it's safe, not on the streets. And if they are caught, just like you were caught, you know, with drugs or anything else, they would probably cause to go in your home and have one of these weapons. Yeah, you'd be prosecuted. I've never suggest sending troops out and collecting and confiscating. And so, again, Tucker Carlson, I love what he says here. Well, let me quote a friend of mine, Eric Swalwell, who, of course, is the representative. He's a congressman from California. Yeah, he's a good guy. Put it back on the screen for me. I'm just going to quote it once again. And we should buy back those weapons. And I'm quoting, we should criminally prosecute any who choose to defy it by keeping their weapons. So you're going to prosecute people who don't give up their weapons. That's gun confiscation. And then Swalwell says, yeah, if we caught them, yeah. And so, again, the game gets played all the time. Oh, we're not looking at gun confiscation. Well, Eric Swalwell tries to pretend that we don't really want to confiscate your weapons. We just really want to buy them back. But if you refuse to buy them back, we will criminally prosecute you. And if we go into a home for any probable cause and we find any of those, we will confiscate those. Doesn't that sound like gun confiscation? I mean, I may be missing something here, but it's just a good example of paying attention to words, especially how people want to use words to try to hide what their agenda is. He would be quite content with every, what he calls assault weapon. By the way, we can get into the very loose definition of assault weapon, because usually that means anything that's a semi-automatic rifle or handgun that has a magazine, which means the confiscation, ultimately, of anything other than a revolver or a single-load shotgun, because almost everything else uses some kind of clip or magazine or that kind of issue. And so, again, you can kind of see where the game gets played, but if nothing else, I just want you to be a wise discerner of what you read on the news magazines and the newspapers, what you read on the Internet, what you see on television, even what you hear on radio, including this radio program. We need discernment, and I don't think the representative, Eric Swalwell, was being quite honest about what he really intends. But I appreciate Tucker Carlson for bringing it out. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Whenever I speak to an audience about the influence of media on children, I quote from a survey done by the Kaiser Family Foundation concerning electronic media. When you add together the amount of time children spend with television, cell phones, iPads, video games, and computers, it essentially becomes a full-time job of more than 53 hours. This is a dramatic increase over a decade ago. The findings of the survey of over 2,000 young people ages 8 to 18 found that their digital day lasted more than 7 hours a day. The primary media inputs were television and music, but substantial amounts of time were also spent on the computer and playing video games. Although time spent with electronic media is increasing, the researchers did find one area that was decreasing: ink. Daily book readership remained somewhat steady, but reading a magazine dropped 20% and reading a newspaper dropped nearly 20%. The survey had a few surprises. For example, the greatest consumers of electronic media were African American Hispanic kids, who spend nearly one-third more time each day with electronics than white kids. And heavy media users aren't necessarily couch potatoes. They actually find ways to cram more physical exercise into their lives than light users. While that may be true, I still think that almost all young people spend too much time with electronic media. I would recommend that you consider having certain times of the day when your children are required to disconnect from electronic media. You know, for decades, I have been talking about the media storm that surrounds our children and grandchildren. This survey of our kids' digital day shows that they are in the midst of a greater storm than we have ever imagined. This should concern parents and educators. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, a lot of other things in the news. One of those is the announcement made by the Trump administration that they are going to prohibit funds going to any agency or any organization, read Planned Parenthood, that actually performs abortions. Right now, what you have is the Trump administration announced its intention to propose new regulations regarding abortion. The ruling would prohibit Planned Parenthood and other abortion referral entities from receiving grant money through Title X. I'll come back to what Title X is in just a minute, but it's basically the government's family planning program. The Title X funds cannot be used for abortion, and that has always been the case, but Planned Parenthood still receives $50 million from the program for other services that they actually are involved with, which are not abortion. And so under the new policy, clinics could not accept the money at all if they recommend or perform abortions. And Jim Dennison has written about this, and he also quotes from Russell Moore. Jim Dennison's been on the program. Russell Moore has been on the program, who is, by the way, the president of the Southern Baptist Convention's, we just talked about a minute ago, Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, who called the ruling a responsible and commendable step towards our goal of totally separating taxpayer funds from Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry. So that is the ruling that has come down, was announced yesterday at the Susan B. Anthony event. And just to give you a little bit of her perspective, let me now quote from our friend John Stonestreet, who's also, of course, been on the program, said back in 1970, Richard Nixon signed Title X into law. Its stated purpose was to provide low-income Americans with acceptable and effective family planning methods and services, by providing grants to public and nonprofit entities. Now, recognize 1970 was still 3 years before the decision of Roe versus Wade on abortion. So in some respects, that is understandable. Well, Section 1008 of the law clearly states that none of the funds appropriated under this title shall be used in programs where abortion is a method of family planning. So that certainly has that. Then in 1988, President Ronald Reagan sought to try to close a big loophole in the law because while groups received Title X funds couldn't perform abortions themselves, they could still refer women to non-recipients who would. In fact, there was nothing in the law as interpreted that prevented recipients from sharing facilities or even staff with abortion providers. So abortion providers could still receive those funds in a sort of accounting gimmick. And that's been one of the concerns. There are, of course, a lot more money that goes to Planned Parenthood than just the $50 million. How about 10 times that much? But again, the argument always is, well, yes, but none of that money goes towards abortion. But money is fungible. That's a big word for saying if I fund everything that doesn't involve abortion, the rent on your facility, the staff that don't perform abortions, the electricity for the building and all the rest, then that frees up more money that you can make off of the abortions, because then that money you make off abortions doesn't have to go for those other hard and fixed costs or even some of those variable costs. Get the point? Well, anyway, that's what's going on here. So basically, the Reagan administration back in 1988 banned Title X recipients from counseling and advising women about abortion or referring them to abortion providers. Although the regulation was challenged in court, it was ultimately upheld by the Supreme Court, interestingly enough. But by the time the dust was settled, Bill Clinton was president, so it really never went into effect. And so since really Bill Clinton, through George W. Bush, through Barack Obama, and now into the year and a half of Donald Trump, it's been kind of the status quo all those times. And so now you have the announcement by the Trump administration, another promise kept, by the way. And if you're pro-life, you got to be happy about this. If you're pro-choice, you got to be upset about this, because it shows again that elections do have consequences. Because the Trump administration proposal, unlike the Reagan-era proposal, doesn't prohibit Title X recipients from counseling clients about the availability of abortion, but it does prohibit the referrals to abortion providers. So under the rule, a woman could be told that she might be better off having an abortion and why, but she can't be told the abortion's name, phone number, address, whatever it might be. And so, again, she could probably be told how to Google it, but, you know, it at least is a step, a very significant step in, I think, the right direction. So, again, if you're going to hear all sorts of people complaining about the subject of abortion, that's a little bit more of the history, frankly, more history that you just received from me than you'll receive on the nightly news or probably any broadcast, because I just want to tell you the full story. Because this will be, again, one of those issues that will be seen as controversial, contentious, and maybe even something you would want to ask these candidates that are asking you for their vote, how they stand on those issues of Title X funding. One other issue before we take a break, then I want to get into this issue of sports gambling, is a piece by Cheryl Atkinson. You might remember her. She worked in the mainstream media for some time. And she is talking about 8 signs pointing to a counterintelligence operation that was deployed against Donald Trump's campaign. Now, she says, here are the 8 signs. Number 1, there was a code name given to these groups. You may have heard about this on some other talk shows, but it's the first time I've mentioned it here on Point of View. The operation had at least one code name that was leaked to the New York Times, and that was Crossfire Hurricane. Then you had the whole issue of wiretaps. Again, Cheryl Atkinson says secret surveillance was conducted on no fewer than 7 Trump associates. That would be Steve Bannon, the lawyer Michael Cohen. It would be, of course, the National Security Advisor, General Michael Flynn, advisor and son-in-law, of course, Jared Kushner, the campaign manager, Paul Manafort, as well as the campaign foreign policy advisors, which would be Carter Page and George Papadopoulos. And the FBI reportedly applied for a secret warrant back in June of 2016 during the campaign to monitor Manafort, Page, Papadopoulos, and Flynn. If indeed that's true, it means that the FBI targeted Flynn 6 months before his much-debated conversation with Russia's ambassador. And then the FBI applied 4 times to wiretap Page after he became a Trump campaign advisor, again starting in July of 2016. Page's office is connected to the Trump Tower, and he reports having spent many hours in Trump Tower. And then CNN has reported that Paul Manafort was wiretapped before and after the election, including during a time when Manafort was known to talk to President Trump. Manafort repeatedly and reportedly has a residence in Trump Tower. So you can see how this, in some respects, allowed them not only to surveil those campaign aides, but the candidate and now president himself. Let's go on. Electronic surveillance, according to Cheryl Atkinson, was used to listen in on 3 Trump transition officials at Trump Tower. That would be Flynn, Bannon, and Kushner, as they met in an official capacity with the Arab Emirates Crown Prince. The FBI also has reportedly wiretapped Flynn's phone conversations with the ambassador from Russia. That took place back in December of 2016. And then now we have NBC recently reported that Cohen, that's Michael Cohen, Trump's personal attorney, was wiretapped. And NBC later corrected the story, saying Cohen was the subject of a pen register where they monitor the numbers, but maybe, and possibly the internet communications, but maybe not the actual words. So those are 2 of the 8 points. Let me take 1 or 2 more, and we'll just leave it at that. You also have national security letters, another controversial tool reportedly used by the FBI to obtain phone records and other documents in the investigation were national security letters which bypass judicial approval. And so they use those kinds of letters to surveil these individuals. And then we have the whole issue of unmasking. That is where you identify the protected names of Americans captured by government surveillance. In other words, if you're talking to somebody that could be a terrorist or even just a foreign ambassador, lots of times you do not know who is talking to them. But, of course, we've had a variety of people from Samantha Powers, James Clapper, Sally Yates, and others that actually, in one way or another, were involved in this. It goes into a lot more detail, so I'll leave that alone for you to read at your leisure. And then, of course, we have just a tremendous number of leaks that were used there as well, including the leak of the so-called Steele dossier, which turned out to be nothing more than something that was put together for the Hillary Clinton campaign to bring dirt on Donald Trump. And, of course, it was pretty much made up of whole cloth. So you've got all sorts of things pointing to the fact that there was a counterintelligence operation deployed against Donald Trump. As an illustration of how significant that was, those of you that actually read some of Donald Trump's tweets know that he had quite a tweet storm today about some of this. And I appreciate Cheryl Atkinson to putting it all in one document to kind of summarize where we are in that investigation. I'm sure we'll come back to it, but I thought I'd put it on the table for you to deal with. We'll take a break. Be back with more right after this.
Every big story in human history began with one person. Point of View Radio has sparked many stories during the past 5 decades.
I'm 25 years old, and I've been listening to Point of View for about 12 years now.
I can't say enough about how it's touched my life and changed me completely.
The effect was incredible, and it was immediate.
I mean, I've seen Congress turn around.
There was a transformation that really did take place.
Oh, you missed your cue. This is where your story belongs. How has Point of View made a difference in your life and your community? We want to hear your story, and when you share it, you'll automatically be entered in a drawing for an iPad mini, and if we share your story to inspire others, we'll send you a Bible stick, an audio New Testament that you can take anywhere. So tell us your story before June 1st at pointofview.net/story or call 1-855-335-2100. You could win an iPad mini, and your story may encourage someone else to make a difference. 855-335-2100 and pointofview.net/story. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, I might just mention that as we were going to the break, you heard our comments about share your story, and certainly want to encourage those of you that have been listening for some time, or maybe you just only been listening the last couple of weeks. We've been broadcasting on the local stations here, but again, we'd love to hear your story. We, of course, had over the years have had stories of people that have started schools or pregnancy resource centers. Others maybe don't have something as grandiose as that, but they decided to register to vote or get involved politically or go to their legislature and express their opinion. But we'd love love to hear your story. So again, I want to encourage you to visit the website, pointofview.net. You'll see this banner that says, share your story, begin here. And so, as we just mentioned a minute ago, as a thank you for you sharing your story with us, we'll send you our Bible stick, which we have been making available during our Truth Team Week, and of course also enter you into a drawing for an iPad mini. So those are some resources that we'd like to put in your hands. You can certainly help us. By the way, as he mentioned, Bob mentioned just a minute ago, if you don't want to go online or you don't have a computer, we could still get your story. You can leave a voicemail message, and that is 855-335-2100, 855-335-2100. And we'll mention that again a little bit later. But we'd love to hear your story, and would love to be able to share that with others, because I know it's a real encouragement to everyone. Let me get into the issue of sports gambling. As we are coming to the end of May, I wanted to at least talk about a decision that came down from the Supreme Court that was pretty significant. Just over a week ago, the Supreme Court struck down what was called the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act. Passed many years ago, interestingly enough, and that was something that was passed by Congress which barred state-authorized sports gambling with some exceptions. What was the exception? Well, Nevada. And so they kind of grandfathered that in. Well, the case was brought by New Jersey, and New Jersey now plans to join Nevada as another state that would allow legal sports betting. Other states, I'm hearing Delaware, New York, Pennsylvania, West Virginia probably are going to join as well. And so I wanted to spend just a little bit of time talking about this. The first article we've posted here is by our good friend Jim Dennison. I just mentioned him a minute ago, and he posted one on why gambling is so popular and so addictive. And he talks a little bit about sports gambling. I'm going to do so as well. And then also posted one of my pieces on gambling, a whole week of radio programs I've done on gambling. And, of course, also quote from my book. Those of you looking online can see I'm holding up my book, Christian Ethics in Plain Language. Chapter 18 is on gambling. So I'm going to get into this in a little bit more detail. But the first thing, which was kind of interesting, is I wondered how the professional sports associations would react. And we've heard from the Major League Baseball. Let me quote from the NFL. The NFL said that it has a long-standing and unwavering commitment to protecting the integrity of the game. And then they also called on Congress to come back and respond to this Supreme Court decision. We'll see whether it happens. I have my doubts. But anyway, they called on Congress to get involved because of the potential harms posed by sports betting and a concern that this would erode public confidence in these events. Now, you might say, how so? And this is something I've been involved with. I think it was back in the 1980s. I was supposed to debate Jimmy the Greek. Some of you might even remember Jimmy the Greek. He canceled that day, and I had someone else. But I did a debate on the McNeil-Lair show on this whole subject. And even before you get into the moral issue, I will get to that in just a minute, there's just, how would the NFL think that this would have any kind of impact? And the example that I use, and there are many in my book, but the example I use is, suppose first of all, you have to recognize, for those of you that are not gamblers, what you do is you bet against the point spread, okay? So it's not who's going to win or lose, it's how many points they're going to win by. So you have to understand that. So I put some hypotheticals together. Suppose a team was picked to win by more than 3 points, and a football team is leading by 1 point with less than a minute left. Even if they're on the opponent's 20-yard line, the coach might decide not to kick a field goal because, after all, what's the point? Just why risk the possibility of a block kick? Just run out the clock. Can you imagine if indeed you have kind of a nationalized issue, because now you could see fans and especially gamblers want to call for an investigation. Was there point shaving? Because we've had some of these scandals over the years. So you can begin to see that there are some really significant issues. And in this chapter on gambling, and I'm going to try to update it, obviously, now because we've got a Supreme Court decision. There's also other chapters here on everything from homosexuality. I need to add some material on everything from transgenderism, the material on pornography, some of the others. But I also want to add that as well in terms of sports gambling, because you can use all sorts of examples. In there, I use some older examples, Boston College, Tulane University. This all happened ultimately before you had such rampant sports gambling. Now, do we recognize that people gamble on sports all the time? Oh, yes, I guess so. How much gambling takes place during Super Bowl weekend? A lot. But when it becomes state-sanctioned, might cause a little bit more of a problem. So that's one of the issues, and I think one of the reasons why you had the NFL, of all people, and Major League Baseball saying, we've got some questions about this, and we want Congress to act. But again, back to the Jim Dennison piece, I thought it was very well done. He said, according to American Gaming Association, gambling in the United States is a $240 billion industry, employing 1.7 million people in 40 states. And so he asked, well, why is it so popular? And the former director of gaming enforcement in the state of New Jersey told a conference that the success of Atlantic City was tied to how well it sold its only products. He explained, that product is not entertainment or recreation or leisure. It's really adrenaline, a biological substance capable of producing excitement, highs generated usually by anticipation or expectation of a future event, especially when the outcome of that event is in doubt, unquote. This is why some people have actually said that gaming and gambling is sort of like a mind-altering drug. It creates some of the same kinds of reactions as other kinds of issues. And what Jim Dennison does is talk about some of the reasons for why gambling has become so popular. Number one, he says it provides a sense of partial reinforcement that we crave. That is, I'll get lucky next time is a powerful lure. Number two, something I talk about in my column, some fall for what is called the gambler's fallacy. And even this weekend, I was at a place where there was some gambling that took place, and just walking through there, I was just kind of paying attention to the reaction of some of the people at the gaming tables or the slot machines and things like that. Because the gambler's fallacy is this. They oftentimes believe that a string of losses makes a win, a future win, more likely. So it's known as the gambler's fallacy. Number three, he says the illusion of control causes many gamblers to believe that they have some power over the outcome, whether picking numbers in a lottery or blowing on dice before throwing them. I actually watched one woman throw some dice just to say, did I see any of that? Number four, loss aversion is a major motivator. We feel more pain over losing $100 than the joy over winning. When a gambler loses money, he or she is motivated to keep gambling so as to recover what has been lost. So he goes into some of the issues of addictive gambling. As many as he says of 750,000 young people have a gambling addiction. And this Wednesday, of course, is our Millennial Roundtable, although I don't have millennials with us today, but you can see that that is not just a problem for older people, it's a problem for younger people, in large part because they have been online and have been able to, in some respects, access gambling more effectively than the previous generation. As a matter of fact, when I wrote my book, Christian Ethics in Plain Language, it was sort of a revision of a book that I'd written years ago, which then added some new chapters. But I noticed that from the time when I started writing about some of these ethical issues in the 1980s to the time when this book came out, almost 20 years ago now, that there was something remarkable that had changed. And what had changed was the Internet. We went from certainly pornography that you had to obtain by going to a seedy section of town to now it was at your fingertips. We went from a situation in which we had adultery to online affairs. You have a situation where you had gambling, and now you have online gambling. And so in some respects, I could see how the Internet took one of these social issues, maybe one of these social concerns, and made it even worse. And I think what we're finding here is sometimes young people are even more likely to get involved in gambling because they've been used to playing games on their computers, on their phones, oftentimes even have access to various gambling sites. And so the problem has gone from bad to worse. Let's take a break, though. I'll talk a little bit more about how do we respond to it from a biblical point of view. After all, there's nothing in the Bible that says thou shalt not gamble. But are there any biblical principles we can apply? Let me see if I can come up with a few. We'll do that right after these important messages.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Lieutenant Junior Grade Aloysius H. Schmidt was a Catholic priest better known as Father Schmidt. Originally from St. Lucas, Iowa, Father Schmidt was aboard the USS Oklahoma on December 7, 1941, as the battleship was torpedoed in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Father Schmidt had just led Mass that infamous Sunday morning when the ship carrying 1,300 souls was attacked. Father Schmidt posthumously received the Navy and Marine Corps Medal for Heroism. According to the citation, Father Schmidt realized only a few men could escape through a small hatch. He insisted that others go ahead of him. He remained behind, pronouncing a blessing on the men while they crawled out to safety. 75 years later, Father Schmidt's remains have been positively identified and appropriately honored. Many men and women are heroes, but Father Schmidt's selfless act for his sailors is born more from care for their souls than of valor. As I consider his heroism, I'm reminded that there is an effort underway to rid chaplains like Father Schmidt from our military. That can never be. Our military has welcomed the chaplaincy corps from its inception because one's right to religious liberty is not surrendered at basic training. First Liberty defends chaplains like Father Schmidt who would voluntarily trade a rifle for a Bible in service to their comrades in arms. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. You can protect your religious freedom by going to firstliberty.org to download your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit. Our attorneys created kits for churches, ministries, Christian schools, military members, students, and teachers, and the workplace. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back a few more minutes if you'd like to know a little bit more about this issue of sports gambling, which I think is going to be an issue before Congress. We'll see. And, of course, the NFL has spoken out on that. Major League Baseball will watch for some comments maybe from the NBA and others. But just before we run out of time, let me just mention a couple of biblical principles. I'll be the first to admit that there is nothing in the Bible that says thou shalt not gamble. But at the same time, maybe a couple of principles to think about. First of all, I talk about the fact that the Bible really emphasizes the idea of the sovereignty of God. And yet gambling oftentimes is based upon chance. And so the Bible admonishes people to work creatively and for the benefit of others. You can see that in Ephesians 4:28, for example. And yet there's kind of this something for nothing kind of mindset of gambling. It has been interesting to look at the work that was done at the American Enterprise Institute, in which they found that individuals who worked for their success were happy, but people who received it without any kind of work, that is, they won the lottery, did not show the same level of happiness. There is a sense in which working and receiving a reward is going to lead to more happiness than getting a something for nothing kind of idea. And that brings me to my second point, and that is some people have said that gambling sometimes can breed in certain individuals a form of covetousness. Does the Bible speak out about that? Well, yeah, Ephesians, certainly Exodus 20:17, but some other passages fit there. And coveting and greed and selfishness are sometimes the emotions that cause some people to gamble. So certainly, if nothing else, that's a concern. And when you especially get to state-sponsored gambling, lotteries and things like that, you almost have the state in this particular case, enticing people to gamble. If you've seen all the lottery commercials and things like that, which frankly, for many of our listeners, aren't as bad here. When I go to other places like New York and New Jersey, Vermont, I see a lot more commercials about lotteries than I do in the state of Texas. And of course, I know we have some listeners up there in Minnesota. But again, there are certain states that just almost overdo that and really almost build up kind of this desire for greed and covetousness. So that's another issue to think about. A third would be, and this is one that surfaces time and time again, that gambling can really destroy what we call the work ethic. In Colossians 3:23 and 24, Paul says, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for men, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you're serving." And in 2 Thessalonians, perhaps as well, "For you yourselves know that you ought to follow our example. For even when we were with you, we gave you this rule: if a man will not work, neither shall he eat." And the 20th Century Fund recently talked about the fact that gambling's get-rich-quick appeal appears, they said, to mock capitalism's core values. What are those core values of capitalism? Well, I talk about it in our most recent booklet that we had coming out, and that is disciplined work habits, thrift, prudence, adherence to routine, and the relationship between effort and reward. And so some have looked at how that might have an impact on even a person's work ethic. Then we have another one, and that is certainly one that we can relate to, and those of you that have a gambler in your household can relate to this, because gambling sometimes can destroy families. Gambling oftentimes can be a major cause of family neglect. Many of the social costs associated with gambling come from this kind of get-rich-quick mindset. And oftentimes when people get caught up in a gambling frenzy, which, by the way, shows up in other places too, sometimes investing and harebrained schemes. So I'm not just saying that this is exclusive to gambling, but nevertheless, they begin to neglect their families. Money spent on lottery tickets or racetracks is frequently not risk capital, but it is money that should be spent on their family needs. And according to 1 Timothy 5:8, a person who refuses to care for his family is what? Worse than an unbeliever or an infidel. And, of course, we are admonished to provide for our children. And, of course, we're supposed to be able to eat the bread of our labors. And so you can see that sometimes family neglect is an issue. I think it's striking to see, as we have already documented here, 750,000 just young people have a gambling addiction. One of the things that I document in my book is that you have an even higher percentage of estimated at least 12 million compulsive gamblers in the country. So, again, those are individuals who aren't taking just a few dollars as risk dollars, but they may be taking money that should be going to supporting their family. And then one last one is that, again, one of my biggest concerns is that if a person wants to gamble on their own, fine. But number 5, this is a big concern. We have state-sponsored gambling. And it's one thing for you to actually go and bet on your own, but it's when the government has lotteries, when it has horse racing, when it has all sorts of different, maybe even allows for casinos and more things, where then the government, if anything, is supposed to be, as it says in Romans 13, a servant of God. And yet here you have government's role is actually doing things to actually begin to tear away at the social fabric of society. And so this, again, is, another issue and concern. So nothing else. It is kind of interesting, and I think the biggest concern of gambling is the same kind of concern with other kinds of drugs, like drugs and alcohol and the rest. Just the whole issue that indeed we have people that develop kind of almost a pathological attitude towards gambling. And again, if you'd like to read a little bit more about this, we have the Denison Forum article, because he talks about this one Institute for Addiction Recovery, which has evidence that pathological gambling is an addiction similar to chemical addiction. Winning at gambling has been compared neurologically to a cocaine habit or a cocaine addict receiving an infusion of drugs. So again, does that say that you could never gamble? No, I'll leave that for you. But if nothing else, it's just an illustration of the fact that once again, the Supreme Court has given us a decision which is going to allow for more individuals to gamble. They probably were betting on sports, but now will indeed the legalization of that lead to more? I think we know what the answer is there. And so this is why I wanted to post this particular piece by Jim Dennison, Why Gambling is So Popular and So Addictive, and also posted the piece that I have on the subject of gambling, which is kind of a summary of the whole chapter in my book, Christian Ethics in Plain Language. We come back. I know we have a couple of comments on our Facebook post, and I'll probably get back to this as well as we go to our national audience. But before we do so, let me just give you an overview of what's going to happen in the next hour, and that is we're going to look at a couple of these key issues. And interestingly enough, because of the shooting that took place in Santa Fe, Texas, I want to quote from a good friend of ours who's been on the program many times before, Jerry Newcomb, which reminded me that Santa Fe was not only the place where they banned having prayer before a football game, but it's also, and I'd forgotten about this until I read his column, a place where they banned even having a prayer before a baccalaureate service. So when you see those two actions that took place, and then years later you see the shooting, I'm not saying the two are correlated, but to say that they had no relationship at all, I don't know. I want to come back and talk about that for just a few minutes. We'll get back into this issue of sports gambling, of course. And then Dan Celio will be with us before the second hour is up, and we're going to spend some time talking about the national debt. After all, this is our Millennial Roundtable, and if there's one thing the millennial generation has inherited from the previous generations, it is a national debt that is $21 trillion. I can remember a time when people were lamenting the $1 trillion national debt under Ronald Reagan. My, how things have changed. Let's take a break. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take a break and come back with more right after this.
Point of View Radio has been changing lives for a generation. Listeners have been inspired to apply themselves in all kinds of ways, to stand up as lawyers, defending the Constitution and freedom, to start Christian schools, training up a new generation, to launch ministries on college campuses, even to run for and serve in Congress. So again, what are you doing to make a positive change? One way to start today is to join the Truth Team, Truth Team 360, and help us change lives. Our nation needs a Truth Team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. We're going to spend some time talking about a variety of different issues. Wednesday is usually our Millennial Roundtable. We have a couple of millennials that could not join us, so this is going to be a little bit more unusual, but still we will get into some issues that affect the millennial generation as well as all of us, especially later this hour as we talk with our friend Dan Cilia about, Mr. President, why aren't you talking about the national debt? And certainly the millennial generation is inheriting from the previous generations, the builder generation, the boomer generation, the buster generation, a debt that is exceeding $20 trillion. I can remember a time when there were complaints about the fact that there was going to be a $1 trillion debt, national debt under Ronald Reagan, which frankly was probably a pretty good investment from the time of George Washington to the end of Ronald Reagan's administration, little over $1 trillion in national debt. And considering that we fought an American Revolution, a Civil War, a World War I, a World War II, all sorts of other military campaigns, we had the Pacific and the Transcontinental Railroad, the interstate highway system, and a variety of other things. Might not have been too bad. But anyway, we will get into this issue of a national debt that's no longer $1 trillion, but almost $21 trillion, and what that means. So we will get into that. But I thought we'd spend a little bit of time looking at a couple of news stories. One of those, which I have mentioned already, is the fact that the Trump administration has decided to actually put forward policies that will prevent various groups, I think mostly Planned Parenthood, from actually receiving grant money through Title X. Title X was something that was developed back in 1970 under Richard Nixon administration, was for family planning, and the money could not be used for abortion. But the game has been played sort of in a funny sort of way, really since the end of the Reagan administration and the beginning of Bill Clinton, which is, in a sense, really kind of ignored those rules. So the Trump administration now has proposed new regulations regarding abortion. The ruling would prohibit Planned Parenthood and other abortion referable entities from receiving grant money through Title X, which is, again, the family planning program which developed back in the 1970s. It cannot be used for abortion, but Planned Parenthood still, over the years, has received each year about $50 million from the program for other services. And so under the new policy, clinics could not accept the money at all if they recommend or perform abortion. So that is a new policy. And one of the comments I thought was kind of interesting on our Facebook Live, we do broadcast on Facebook Live, was, wonder what the Never Trumpers have to say to all the positive pro-life initiatives. So love to get your comments about that. And that is a story that has been carried in the last couple of days and was announced even again, I believe it was last night, at the Susan B. Anthony banquet by Donald Trump. So again, just one more pro-life initiative, which we'll see how that is implemented in Congress. But again, some of the rules that are being proposed under the Trump administration. I thought since we haven't said much since the shooting in Santa Fe, Texas, I would come back to something that might relate to some of the conversation we had yesterday. Those of you that listen know that in the Next hour, what's kind of the last hour of the program, we spent some time talking about whether In God We Trust could actually be posted in the classrooms, even if it was privately funded, and that was sort of a controversy up there in Minnesota. And, of course, we've talked about how some have wanted to take In God We Trust out of our money. And then we had some of you calling in talking about how we've taken God out of the classroom. And our good friend Jerry Newcomb reminded me of what happened in Santa Fe. In Santa Fe, Texas, there are two issues, and I'd only remembered one of them. One was, if you remember, this case from Santa Fe, Texas, went all the way to the Supreme Court because it was where the actual students who were the athletes wanted to have a prayer before the Texas high school football game. And that was declared unconstitutional, if you can believe it, by the Supreme Court. They wanted to have a separation of player and prayer. But I'd forgotten about the other case, which actually prevented even a prayer at a baccalaureate. So let me read from Jerry Newcomb, and then I want to get into this issue of sports gambling, because that's another Supreme Court decision that is coming down. But Jerry Newcomb said, about 20 years ago, I produced a story for D. James Kennedy Ministry on the subject of school prayer in Santa Fe, Texas. On the one hand, many parents and ministers were eager to promote godly influence in the school district. On the other hand, a judge ruled against such influence and did so with great hostility. Here we are 20 years later, and the tragedy of Santa Fe, Texas shooting is one of the growing number of cases of school shootings. Our thoughts and prayers, of course, are with the victims of the massacre. Here's what Jerry Newcomb says. Here's the big picture of America. Our founders acknowledged our God-given rights. They gave us freedom of religion. They did not want an establishment of religion on the federal level. There could be no Church of America like there was a Church of England. The founders also wanted the free exercise of religion. That would include the right to pray, yes, in the name of Jesus, yes, at various official events. They believed in this right to the point that the founders hired chaplains for the military and chaplains for the legislatures, and even chaplains for the U.S. House and U.S. Senate. Furthermore, the founders recognized that the only way our Constitution would work is if people themselves were virtuous. They said that way they would be virtuous through the religion practice on a voluntary basis. Then he says, fast forward to 1947, when Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black reinterpreted the Establishment Clause to mean that there should be a strict wall of separation between church and state. This wall was to be impregnable. He says we cannot allow the slightest breach. Well, then he fast forwards down to what actually happened in this particular situation there in Santa Fe, Texas. And I kind of forgotten about that, because what you had is in Santa Fe, Texas, this was 20 years ago, you had the ACLU filed suit to halt prayers at a baccalaureate service privately sponsored by a group of ministers. The federal judge, Samuel Kent, said that the ministers could still hold the voluntary service, but that no one could pray in the name of any specific deity, such as the name of Jesus. Just to make sure they got the point, Judge Kennedy declared, quote, anybody who violates these orders, no kidding, is going to wish that he or she had died as a child when this court gets through with it, unquote. Furthermore, the judge ruled that anyone invoking the name of Jesus at this voluntary religious service would be immediately arrested by federal marshals and jailed for a minimum of 6 months. Whew. So, again, not only, he says, was there to be no voluntary religious expression of ideas at the Santa Fe public schools, but anyone who dared to introduce godly influence would be summarily punished. Interestingly enough, there was also the issue of prayers at the football games, which I mentioned just a minute ago, a case that went all the way to the Supreme Court with a decision against the prayers. You might say, well, what happened? Well, it turns out that Judge Kent is the one that ended up in prison. That's the rest of the story. He was convicted of obstruction of justice and a sexual harassment suit against him, and so even though the ministers did not end up in prison, Judge Samuel Kent did end up in prison. But sadly, the Supreme Court, in its wisdom, and I put that in quotes, said that you could not have a prayer before a high school football game, arguing that a high school football game is not a religious event. They've never been to a Texas high school football game. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Whenever I speak to an audience about the influence of media on children, I quote from a survey done by the Kaiser Family Foundation concerning electronic media. When you add together the amount of time children spend with television, cell phones, iPads, video games, and computers, it essentially becomes a full-time job of more than 53 hours. This is a dramatic increase over a decade ago. The findings of the survey of over 2,000 young people ages 8 to 18 found that their digital day lasted more than 7 hours a day. The primary media inputs were television and music, but substantial amounts of time were also spent on the computer and playing video games. Although time spent with electronic media is increasing, the researchers did find one area that was decreasing: ink. Daily book readership remained somewhat steady, but reading a magazine dropped 20% and reading a newspaper dropped nearly 20%. The survey had a few surprises. For example, the greatest consumers of electronic media were African American Hispanic kids, who spend nearly one-third more time each day with electronics than white kids. And heavy media users aren't necessarily couch potatoes. They actually find ways to cram more physical exercise into their lives than light users. While that may be true, I still think that almost all young people spend too much time with electronic media. I would recommend that you consider having certain times of the day when your children are required to disconnect from electronic media. You know, for decades, I have been talking about the media storm that surrounds our children and grandchildren. This survey of our kids' digital day shows that they are in the midst of a greater storm than we have ever imagined. This should concern parents and educators. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. I want to talk about sports gambling for just a minute. This decision came down about a week ago from the Supreme Court, and I thought it would be good, especially now that some other entities have begun to weigh in on the possible implications of that. And again, if you'd like to get some more information about this, first of all, I've posted an article by our friend Jim Dennison from the Dennison Forum. One of the comments, interestingly enough, on our Facebook Live page is the Dennison article on gambling by Jim Dennison. They say is excellent. I would agree. It's the first article I've posted. The second article there is one that I've put together, a week of radio programs we've done in the past on gambling in general. But I wanted to focus on this issue of sports gambling for just a minute because the Supreme Court struck down what was called the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act. And that is one that barred state-authorized sports gambling with some exceptions. Of course, most of that was Nevada. The case was brought by New Jersey, and so New Jersey probably will try to join now Nevada as another state that will allow legal sports gambling and betting. Other states like Delaware, New York, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, to mention just a few, probably will follow. And so I kind of wondered what would be the response from some of these professional sports associations, and we didn't have to wait long. The NFL said that it has a long-standing and unwavering commitment to protecting the integrity of the game. And then they went on to call on Congress to do something about this particular decision that was rendered by the Supreme Court, because they felt that it was important for Congress to get involved because of the potential harms posed by sports betting and the concern that it would erode public confidence in the events. I have mentioned this before, but let me mention it again. In my book, Christian Ethics in Plain Language, I'm holding it up right now for those of you that might be watching online. I have chapter 18 on the subject of gambling, and I actually have a whole section in that chapter on sports betting itself. And the reason I think the NFL and Major League Baseball and others are concerned about the integrity of the game is this. And that is, if you never gambled or never really paid attention, gamblers bet on the point spread. It's not who wins and who loses, but by how much. So I point out in my book some examples. Let me just use one. Suppose a team was picked to win by more than 3 points and was leading by 1 point with less than a minute left. Even if the team was on the opponent's 20-yard line, I think the coach might decide not to kick a field goal because in so doing might risk the possibility of a blocked kick. But you can imagine then they were supposed to win by 3, they only win by 1. You got some people that lose their bet because the coach made a wise decision. But wait a minute, was he making that decision because of point shaving or something like this? It's not like we haven't had some examples like that. Tulane University, Boston College, we can go down the long list. We know them all the way back to the Black Sox. Remember that in baseball? So you can imagine if indeed we get to a point where we just have pretty much nationalized, legalized sports betting, I think some of the fans, some of the gamblers are going to want to call for an investigation. So that's something to really put on the table even before we talk about some of the moral issues or the biblical ideas. And I think it's interesting because this piece by Jim Dennison reminds us that according to the American Gaming Association, gaming and gambling in the United States is a $240 billion industry, employing about 1.7 million people in 40 states. And he talks about various ways in which it's popular. One is, interestingly enough, the director of gaming enforcement in the state of New Jersey, which is the one that brought the case, told a conference that they're very successful in selling their product. What's their product? He said, interestingly enough, the product is not entertainment or recreation or leisure. It's really adrenaline, a biological substance capable of producing excitement, highs generated usually by anticipation or expectation of a future event, especially when the outcome of that event is in doubt. That's why some people have even referred to gambling as like a drug. It's like a mind-altering drug. When we look at some of the numbers, of course, we have about 12 million in round numbers, and that could be even low because the numbers I've looked at are old, but about 12 million compulsive gamblers. But one of the things that Jim Dennison points out, since it's our Millennial Roundtable, is young people have quite a gaming addiction and a gambling addiction. 750,000 young people, 20s and 30s, have the highest rates of problem gambling. And this kind of gets back to something I noticed when I published my book, Christian Ethics in Plain Language. This is an advanced version. It added additional chapters. But when I first started writing about ethics back in the 1980s, interestingly enough, I noticed something different from the 1980s and 1990s to now, and that is the impact of the Internet. The easiest one is to see pornography. It used to be the only place you get pornography is in a seedy section of town. Now all you have to do is, it's a mouse click away. I saw this with adultery. We went from adultery to online affairs, but also noticed it in Chapter 18 on gambling. We went from gambling to online gambling, and, of course, all of the gaming as well. So the younger generation, since this is our Millennial Roundtable, may be even more susceptible to some of those concerns. And so it's just one more issue to pay attention to. And the whole development of what Jim Dennison has some quotes from one Institute for Addiction Recovery talking about what is called pathological gambling. And a lot of this has to do with what's called the gambler's fallacy. That is the belief that my string of losses mean that I'm overdue for a win. So I'm just about ready to win. Or maybe sometimes loss aversion is a major motivator. We oftentimes feel more pain over losing $100 than we feel joy over winning $100. So if I lose money, especially a compulsive gambler, may be motivated to keep gambling and to try to recover some of this. Now, does that mean you could never gamble? Well, I'll leave that to you, but certainly does the Bible have anything to say about gambling per se? No, there's no Bible verse that says thou shalt not gamble, but there are numerous biblical principles that I think we might want to consider. For example, gambling in many people can actually create and maybe even breed a form of covetousness. Exodus 20, verse 17 talks about that, obviously. It can be a destroyer of the work ethic in Colossians 3, 23 and 24. Certainly, one of the concerns that some have surfaced is how gambling can corrupt values of hard work and thrift and prudence, and replacing them with a dependency on luck and chance. And, of course, the issue of addiction, sometimes that can be even family destroying. It isn't just that you're betting risk money, but money that should be used for food and clothing and shelter. And, of course, we talked about this idea of the gambler's fallacy, where a string of losses maybe even is more motivating to try to gamble enough to win your winnings back. And so there are just a lot of very significant issues. And I thought it was interesting. Jim Dennison quotes, for example, from Proverbs 28, "Those who work their land will have abundant food, but those who chase fantasies will have their fill of poverty." And he added, "Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. This too is meaningless." And you find that in Ecclesiastes 5:10. And, of course, probably one of the more famous verses in 1 Timothy 6:10, "The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil." Doesn't mean money is evil, but the love of money can be. So I just thought I'd give you a few things to think about as we probably will see Congress attempt, I don't know how successful it will be, but attempt to try to address this issue of sports gambling. In the meantime, those of you in the states of Nevada and New Jersey, as well as those of you that might start seeing this develop in Delaware, New York, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, some other places may see that debate taking place in your state legislatures. So did want to cover some of that real briefly before we meet with Dan Celia. And as we go to a break, one of the things we are implementing today, and I wanted to prepare you for it, is the desire for us to actually collect some of your stories. If you listen to Point of View, you know that we've had a lot of great stories of individuals who've had a positive influence, that we in one way or another have encouraged you to do something. Sometimes we've had individuals start a school. Some people have actually started a pregnancy resource center. Some have decided to run for office. But you may just have a story about how you may have thought about homeschooling, or you might have thought about getting involved. You might have just decided to register to vote. We'd love to hear your story. And this is a way in which, as you share your story, we can share it with others, and that would be an encouragement, I think, to the Point of View family. So let me encourage you, as we go to a break, to visit our website, and as you go there, you'll see a banner that says Share Your Story, and there's a red button that says Begin Here. And as you'll find out in just a minute, if you share your story, as a thank you, we'll send you a Bible stick, and we'll also enter you into a drawing for an iPad mini. Sounds like a good deal. So I hope as you'll take the time to share your story so we can share it with others. We'll be right back.
Every big story in human history began with one person. Point of View Radio has sparked many stories during the past 5 decades.
I'm 25 years old and have been listening to Point of View for about 12 years now.
I can't say enough about how it's touched my life and changed me completely.
The effect was incredible, and it was immediate.
I mean, I've seen Congress turn around.
There was a transformation that really did take place.
Oh, you missed your cue. This is where your story belongs. How has Point of View made a difference in your life and your community? We want to hear your story, and when you share it, you'll automatically be entered in a drawing for an iPad mini, and if we share your story to inspire others, we'll send you a Bible stick, an audio New Testament that you can take anywhere. So tell us your story before June 1st at pointofview.net/story, or call 1-855-335-2100. You could win an iPad mini, and your story may encourage someone else to make a difference. 855-335-2100 and pointofview.net/story. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Wednesday is our Millennial Roundtable. We don't have a lot of millennials with us today. One is in Washington, D.C. Another one is at another event, and so we'll try to bring some millennials around next Wednesday's Millennial Roundtable. But one of the topics that does surface when we do this roundtable of those in the 20s and 30s is the national debt. And whether you're a young person or an old person, you've got to be concerned about the fact that we went from about $1 trillion national debt when Ronald Reagan was in office to now more than $20 trillion in national debt. And it seems to me that the president could be talking about that issue. And yet, of course, he didn't during the campaign, nor did his opponent. I mean, you didn't hear Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump talk about it. But that is one of those issues that I think really needs to be addressed. So we have posted our third article here that comes from our good friend Dan Celia. He's been on the program with us before, and I enjoy listening to him on the American Family Radio Network and other places as well. He is the president and CEO of Financial Issues Stewardship Ministries, airs on about 600 radio stations, and really has a desire for people to honor God with their finances. You might remember that oftentimes when we've talked with him, he's talked about make sure that you are investing, for example, in stocks that aren't being used to fund Planned Parenthood or pornography. We just talked about a minute ago the Trump administration is proposing funding cuts for abortion providers like Planned Parenthood. So pay attention to where your funds are going and where your investments are. And, of course, he speaks at all sorts of town hall gatherings, and I've always enjoyed sitting in the audience and listening to him speak on those issues. So, Dan Celia, welcome back to Point of View.
Kirby, it is great to be back with you. I got pretty excited there at the opening of this segment. I just assumed you thought I was a millennial.
No, unfortunately, got the two old guys here talking to the young people. But, I try to explain to them, and we oftentimes have these 20-somethings, 30-somethings in the program here. We do that on Wednesday, and it's really a very popular program, that there was a time in which we didn't have national debt at the level that we have right now. And this is, I think, something that maybe they have grown accustomed to. I'm afraid our politicians have grown accustomed to. But you do some surveys there, interestingly enough, with Financial Issues Stewardship. And I think if I understand this right, more than 90% of the people that you surveyed actually tended to believe that if Donald Trump emphasized decreasing the national debt, that might be helpful in his upcoming elections. Tell us more.
Well, I really believe it would be. And, it's funny. I talked about this morning as well, that, where is the conversation in and around the national debt? And his base is very interested in the debt. And here's the odd part about all of it. And you hit the nail on the head when you said you think politicians have grown accustomed to it. They really have. They've been sold kind of a bill of goods, and maybe we could talk about that later. But, the national debt is something that his base has gotten during the election very energized about. And he's not talking about it. And he has made, the administration has made some great strides in the national debt. Now, April, always a good month for revenues to the government for obvious reasons, tax month. But this April was kind of off the charts. I mean, this was a record-breaking April as far as revenue streams to the government. So that's very good. We see the VA dramatically cut their duplication, their some of the fraud that was going on. Anyway, it's more than $300 billion. And they shut down some facilities that were old and run down and things like that. And the Ben Carson's group made some cuts and are continuing to make cuts. So we're seeing this overall kind of attitude and philosophy and opinion that, we've got to be careful of how we spend our dollars. Let's get rid of the duplicity. Let's get rid of the fraud and so on and so forth. So they've made some efforts, and I think that those efforts are going to begin to pay off. I want to see more efforts, number one. I want to see conversation about it. I think there's not a lot of conversation about it because I don't think he wants the Republicans' feet held to the fire, and even his own, on this issue in case it doesn't work out. Because he's really, regardless of what he thinks, he has come to Washington now and now understands that you've got an entire body of 535 people on Capitol Hill that don't think debt is very much of a big deal. And I know that's an exaggeration. And, the Freedom Caucus, there's a remnant that certainly understand and believe how important it is. But politicians have been sold a bill of goods. They've had lobbyist after lobbyist after lobbyist tell them that debt is not a problem. And they use an example of Japan and China all the time, that has 5 times the debt we do to GDP. And they're saying they're doing just fine. The problem is, and they need to explain this to the politicians, China and Japan are export nations. They depend upon exports. Debt to them, national debt and them printing money, is actually a good thing for them. It makes them competitive. They're lowering the value of their currency. They're manipulating their currency down, and they get to be more competitive as they continue to trash their currency. We're not an export nation, so we're 77% consumer-driven, and debt is a very different issue for a country like America than it is for a country like China or even Japan.
Well, again, I think that was helpful to explain that kind of bill of goods that they've been sold. Let's, if I can, also open up the phones in case you have some questions about the economy or what you think the President Trump should say about the economy or how you feel he is doing. Because as you point out, lots of times he's talking about the stock market, and I know a lot of our listeners have investments in the stock market, but they're much more concerned about things like jobs and the national debt. And yet the reality is that very few people are talking about it, and there really doesn't seem to be a desire to change this. Dan, one of the things I did yesterday was interview a member, actually a candidate for Congress who has been very successful in the Texas legislature defending the rainy day fund. It's interesting. In the state of Texas where we broadcast from, not only do they balance the budget, but they actually put money aside in the rainy day fund, and they make sure people don't try to borrow out of it. What a concept. Like a savings account. But he was saying, he was talking with the people at the Heritage Foundation the other day, and the one guy finally just stopped and said, I've never had a conversation like this before with a congressional candidate. And he said, why? He says, because you really want to come and do something, which I think says a lot about the state of Congress right now, don't you think?
Well, it sure does. And you know what? I think that it's not – I don't think unless the swamp is truly drained and we start to see a majority of the true conservatives, fiscal conservatives, come in that are able, and I mean able because it's not easy, to stand firm on their beliefs while in office and fight for the things that are going to be good for future generations, I think it's going to be a very, very difficult task to get done because these guys in Washington, doesn't matter whether they're Republican or Democrat, none of them seem to have a real problem with debt. And I don't believe any of them really understand how this is impacting future generations. Either that, I'm going to hope they don't understand, because if they do understand, then they just don't care. It's always, well, by the time I get out of, I'll be long gone. I'll be out of office when this implodes. And that may not necessarily be true. But I'll tell you for certain that if we continue on this path of growth that we could potentially be on, I think we've tapped the brakes a little bit, but if we can adopt this pro-corporation, free market economy, pro-growth economy that the administration is bringing in and surrounding himself with, that's going to be a world of change, as long as we do it at the same time that we are talking about the debt and the deficit. If we don't talk about it, if we don't try to fix it, then the members of Congress that are riding on this growth and free market growth and GDP growth kind of thing, which is very good for people's pocketbooks. They're just thinking about how they're going to spend all the revenue.
Yes.
So it's not going to take care of it. And the thing, I wrote an article about this, and the reason I wrote the article was I heard Steve, I don't know if you remember this, Kerby, you probably do. I guess it was, 3 months ago, I'm going to say, where Steve Mnuchin came in and Sarah Sanders stepped aside for a moment, and he took the podium, and he was taking questions, and they were asking him all kinds of economic questions and what was going on. And somebody asked him about the national debt. And every answer to every question he was asked, he said, well, growth is going to fix all that. We're going to grow this economy. And then they got to debt, and he said the same thing. And it made me nervous.
Yeah, it does. We're taking a break. We'll continue our conversation with Dan Celia right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Lieutenant Junior Grade Aloysius H. Schmidt was a Catholic priest better known as Father Schmidt. Originally from St. Lucas, Iowa, Father Schmidt was aboard the USS Oklahoma on December 7, 1941, as the battleship was torpedoed in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Father Schmidt had just led Mass that infamous Sunday morning when the ship carrying 1,300 souls was attacked. Father Schmidt posthumously received the Navy and Marine Corps Medal for Heroism. According to the citation, Father Schmidt realized only a few men could escape through a small hatch. He insisted that others go ahead of him. He remained behind, pronouncing a blessing on the men while they crawled out to safety. 75 years later, Father Schmidt's remains have been positively identified and appropriately honored. Many men and women are heroes, but Father Schmidt's selfless act for his sailors is born more from care for their souls than of valor. As I consider his heroism, I'm reminded that there is an effort underway to rid chaplains like Father Schmidt from our military. That can never be. Our military has welcomed the chaplaincy corps from its inception because one's right to religious liberty is not surrendered at basic training. First Liberty defends chaplains like Father Schmidt who would voluntarily trade a rifle for a Bible in service to their comrades in arms. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. You can protect your religious freedom by going to firstliberty.org to download your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit. Our attorneys created kits for churches, ministries, Christian schools, military members, students, and teachers, and the workplace. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Dan Celia with us, and again, he is the president and CEO of Financial Issue Stewardship Ministries. We have a link to financialissues.org as well as the press release, so you can find that underneath there. Mr. President, why aren't you talking about the national debt? Let's take some phone calls along the way as well. 1-800-351-1212. We'll go to California first, KNLB, and Kathy, thank you for joining us today.
Yes, my question is we're becoming more energy independent from what I'm understanding. So from the proceeds from that we sell to other countries, couldn't we make a bill or something that we could put that towards the debt or on the debt to either bring it down or to completely eliminate the federal debt?
You know, we had Stephen Moore on recently, and he wrote a piece, you may have seen it, Goodbye OPEC, because he's arguing we're moving maybe even to a point of becoming not just energy independent, but maybe even energy dominant. What about that, Dan?
Well, we are energy dominant, in my opinion. You know, we're always going to import certain oil. And I saw an article this morning in the Wall Street Journal talking about, well, we're still importing oil. We're always going to import oil because we have the largest refinery in the country there in East Texas that is owned by a foreign entity. They're not going to buy our oil. Why would they buy our oil? They're going to buy their own oil, and they're going to bring it in. So we're always going to have certain imports. But, you know, Kathy makes a great point, and I think there is something that we could do along those lines. But remember this, Kathy, and think about this. So when we are a vast amount of the oil in which we pump is on federal land. Now, when we had a lot of offshore oil, it was all on federal land, and those companies bid for the rights for that oil, and they pay a 18.75% tax on every barrel of oil that they take out. And then they pay on top of that lease fees for the rights to be able to drill. And it's hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars. I think a great start to reducing the national debt would be to take a long, hard look at that and say, look, we are becoming oil dominant, and how about we commit to a 0.5% that we're never going to touch this money and it's going to go directly towards our national debt. And I think there are other things in the country that we could do that with. I would like to say, another situation is we could take 0.25%. We wouldn't even need to do that much, but 0.25% and put it in the Social Security treasure chest that Congress has been robbing for 30 years. It's filled with paper IOUs. They call it intergovernmental notes. They're IOUs into the Social Security treasure chest. We could fix just Social Security alone with probably 0.25% of those revenues.
Well, again, I appreciate your commentaries, and I did commentary coming out next week on some of those very important issues. And just a good illustration, I think, for our listeners that you don't have to be as smart as Dan Celia. You just have to follow some of his recommendations, and he certainly will be helpful to you. And I would be remiss, just before we run out of time here, to have you maybe talk for just a minute about the kind of work that you've been doing to make sure that we are not investing our resources, our financial resources, in some company that is involved in immoral or anti-biblical issues. So as people go to financialissues.org or get your Financial Issues newsletter, can't you help them make sure that they're using their dollars in a way that honors the Lord?
Yeah, absolutely. Kerby, my goal with the ministry, I've been an advocate for 30 years for biblically responsible investing. And what I mean by that is I don't think we ought to take God's money. I wrote a devotional some years ago called All for the Master to help people focus on everything, their stewardship of everything. And, this money, if we tithe, and I hope we all do, we don't own the other 90%. And that God is entrusting that to us to be a good steward. And I think it's sad that so many people, and they do it unknowingly, I know, but are investing in companies and different things that grieve the heart of God. We are actually, remember, when we buy stock, we take ownership in that company. And that money of that company, though very fractional, is ours. And we shouldn't be investing in companies that are going to use their wealth to support Planned Parenthood. And maybe they're profiting from abortion, or maybe part of their company is involved in the entertainment industry that is part of that pornography industry, or they're investing or working in the gambling sector. There's three things right there that have destroyed the moral fiber of America. And I know it grieves the heart of God. And so my goal as somebody, I'm an economist. I came off of Wall Street. I didn't know the Lord back then. And, when I came to the Lord late in life, it dawned on me that, holy mackerel, until we impact these companies. I had 2 companies, Fortune 100 companies, last year turn. I took them off my list. I had 3 meetings with one of them, 1 meeting with another one and their executives, and both of them almost at the same time around Christmas last year. One was after 18 months. One was after about 12 months, said, we're not doing this anymore. We've thought about it. We agree with your perception. We appreciate it, and we're not doing it anymore. So we're making a little bit of headway, but that's rare. Most of them throw me out.
Yeah, they dig in their heels. Yeah.
Yeah.
But let me just say, we started the program here by talking about sports gambling, the Supreme Court decision, about the Trump administration proposing funding cuts for abortion providers. So everybody agrees with that. But then we turn right around, if we're not thinking about it, in investing in things that promote gambling, pornography, abortion, whatever. And so I just encourage people to go to financialissues.org. We have that link there. And also, if they're concerned about the national debt, to find some of your press releases, and this was just one that you put out here. Mr. President, why aren't you talking about the national debt? So I appreciate the work that you're doing, and know you have to run on, but I appreciate you giving us some time here on Point of View and look forward to the next opportunity with you.
Kerby, my friend, I sure do appreciate it, and I appreciate the opportunity you've given any time. I'm happy to talk with you. Thank you so much.
Need to get you on more often. We'll see if we can do that. Again, Dan Celia, and we have a link to the website. I would certainly encourage you to find out when he's coming to your local community, because I have enjoyed meeting him, shaking his hand, sitting in the audience, and taking notes. I'm not out there getting a hamburger or a sandwich. I'm paying attention to this guy. He really brings a lot to the table, and I appreciate his heart for ministry. And make sure that you're not investing your dollars, even unintentionally, through a 401k or through an IRA or something like that, in companies that are actually contradicting your values. And we've talked today about pornography. We've talked about abortion. We've talked about gambling. Do you want your dollars going there? Didn't think so. And so he's certainly providing that oversight. When we come back, we're going to spend some time talking with our friend John Smirik. He's got a new book out. He's co-author of a book called The Politically Incorrect Guide to Immigration. Now, we've certainly, over the years, featured a lot of these politically incorrect guides. This one is very helpful because immigration's in the news. He's dug up a lot of facts and figures, many of which I've not seen. And so if you're really wondering about the cost of a wall, the cost of immigration, what immigration costs for you, how we should really begin to craft our policies, we're going to spend some time talking with him. And, of course, we'll open up the phones. You may agree or disagree, but I think he's really done a good job of digging into some of these facts and figures, which, frankly, haven't shown up in some of these debates and need to really be addressed. As we're taking a break, let me mention, as I said before, that we would love to hear your story. And so there's an opportunity for you to visit our website, or you can call our toll-free number, 855-335-2100. Share your story, and as a thank you, we'll send you a Bible stick and enter you in a drawing for an iPad mini. We'll be back right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net. Or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour we're going to spend some time talking about immigration, and one of the reasons we're going to do that is because of this new book out, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Immigration, an America First Manifesto. Might just mention that over the years we've done lots of interviews with some of these politically incorrect guides, and I've even got in a shelf near the studio here a number of those books, and they range from things related to American history and Civil War to issues like Islam and Sharia law, socialism, global warming, the Founding Fathers, intelligent design, the Constitution. The list goes on and on and on. And this particular one has to do with the subject of immigration. It is written by two individuals that we've had on the program before. John Smirek has been on quite frequently, and Al Parada has also been on with us as well. And so, again, you can find the book in your local bookstore. We have a link to it on our website, pointofview.net. John Smirek with us, and he has been with us many times as the senior editor of The Stream. Also, of course, the co-author of this book, as well as The Politically Incorrect Guide to Catholicism, which he wrote in the past. A graduate of Yale University with also an MFA and a PhD from Louisiana State University, and joins us now by phone. So, John, once again, welcome back to Point of View.
Thanks. Good to talk to you.
You know, when we talk about immigration, it's not necessarily something we are used to seeing you talking about on the stream. But I know, of course, you used to work as a press secretary for the Louisiana governor, Mike Foster. And so in some respects, it's something you've been aware of, because anybody that is near a border state is well aware of the immigration issue. And, of course, whether you look at those who come from the southern border or even the northern border, or those who overstay their visa, or even if you're concerned about the possibility of Muslim terrorism, you got to really pay attention to this issue of immigration, don't you?
Yeah, you do. And also, if you care about the right to life, if you care about religious liberty. In fact, that's my primary motivation, is that most of these immigrants vote for pro-abortion Democrats who oppose natural marriage, who oppose religious liberty, who want to increase the government's control over our lives. Unfortunately, the places these people come from are often poor, and they bring with them a statist worldview, and the Democratic Party signs them up as quickly as they can as new Democratic Party voters. And my fear is that if we don't stop illegal immigration and cut way back on low-skill legal immigration, we're never going to elect another pro-life president again. I mean, the Republican Party lost the popular vote every year in every election except 2004 since 88 or 90. Since 1988, we've lost the popular vote every time, and we can't rely on the Electoral College. If we keep bringing in 1 million low-skilled people every year into a welfare state, we're going to have one state turn blue after another, and the Supreme Court's going to be stuffed with people like, I don't know, think of your favorite left-wing activist. Al Sharpton will end up on the Supreme Court, or Lawrence Tribe. If you want a Supreme Court that's completely packed by the Democrats, and you want abortion to be legal forever, then keep doing what we're doing.
So again, one of the things you've looked at is the issue of both illegal immigration and legal immigration. one of the arguments I've made, and I want to see if you would agree with that, is sometimes we make legal immigration so difficult. They have to jump through so many different hoops. Sometimes people that we want to come to this country because they bring certain skills, certain mindset, and sometimes it becomes very difficult. And we'll open up the phones again today. And as we've had people telling us stories. I came from Canada, I came from Germany, I came from England, I came from South Africa, wherever I might. And it just took so long to eventually become a citizen. So first of all, sometimes we have too much of bureaucracy in terms of making a person a legal citizen. And then on the other hand, there is also too easy to become an illegal citizen because, and I'm not saying it's easy to cross the southern border or overstay your visa, but it is a little bit easier. Talk about that.
Well, really, the easiest way to become a legal immigrant is to have a brother or an adult child or to be related to someone who's already here. So people who got amnesty in 1986 were able to bring in their extended families. That's how our current legal immigration is set up. It has almost nothing to do with America's need for workers or desire to attract talented, educated people. It's just nepotism. It's a system that Ted Kennedy designed in 1965. I think he wrote it on a bar napkin, and he was mainly trying to get more Irish into Boston. He was trying to help Irish immigrants bring in their families from Ireland, and it worked out very well for the Democratic Party that people from poor countries that have large extended family just keep saying, well, if somebody gets in, then he can bring his brother and his mother and his uncle and his cousins, and pretty soon it's called chain migration. You've imported whole villages from third world countries into a country, the U.S., which no longer is settling new farms. It's no longer opening new factories. When my grandfather came from Austria-Hungary in 1916, he didn't have a lot of skills. He shoveled coal on a tugboat, and he did that for the rest of his life. His job would be illegal right now because it's too dangerous. We don't even do the kind of work that low-skill immigrants are qualified to do. So they end up, a lot of them, on unemployment, food stamps, welfare. Their kids are born citizens entitled to the whole array of social programs. We are destroying our social welfare programs. We're suppressing the wages for the native working class, people who drop out of high school, people who get out of prison, people who just, have a hard time making it in life. We're destroying their jobs by we're replacing them with foreigners who will work for less.
Again, you mentioned one date, and that is Senator Ted Kennedy's law in 1965, but you also, in passing, mentioned something else, and that is in 1986, Ronald Reagan provided amnesty. It was supposed to go to about 3 million, but your book argues that because of what we might call chain migration and by extended families, it ended up being, 11 million?
Right, yeah. And so the DACA and the so-called Dreamers, if they are given citizenship, they'll be able to sponsor millions and millions of new immigrants who can then sponsor more immigrants themselves. It's a never-ending chain. And it has nothing to do with America's labor market. It has nothing to do with what our companies need, with what our communities need. It's just a nepotistic system of favors set up by Teddy Kennedy that is inexplicably still the law of the land.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll get into some of those details. But those two key dates, again, you might want to be aware of it. And again, it's very well documented in this book. 1965, of course, was the Ted Kennedy law. 1986, the amnesty provided by Ronald Reagan, which I'm sure he would now regret, and probably did at the time. But I want to talk about a couple of issues. First of all, the expense. Some people have said, well, how expensive will it be to build the wall? What kind of expense and what kind of cost do American taxpayers actually incur because of illegal immigration? Of course, John has already talked about some of the political considerations as well. And so what that might mean and how that fits together, what kind of policies can change, those are all issues we want to put on the table. And if you'd like to join our conversation today as we talk with John Smerick, co-author of the book, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Immigration, we'll welcome your phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Whenever I speak to an audience about the influence of media on children, I quote from a survey done by the Kaiser Family Foundation concerning electronic media. When you add together the amount of time children spend with television, cell phones, iPads, video games, and computers, it essentially becomes a full-time job of more than 53 hours. This is a dramatic increase over a decade ago. The findings of the survey of over 2,000 young people ages 8 to 18 found that their digital day lasted more than 7 hours a day. The primary media inputs were television and music, but substantial amounts of time were also spent on the computer and playing video games. Although time spent with electronic media is increasing, the researchers did find one area that was decreasing: ink. Daily book readership remained somewhat steady, but reading a magazine dropped 20% and reading a newspaper dropped nearly 20%. The survey had a few surprises. For example, the greatest consumers of electronic media were African American Hispanic kids, who spend nearly one-third more time each day with electronics than white kids. And heavy media users aren't necessarily couch potatoes. They actually find ways to cram more physical exercise into their lives than light users. While that may be true, I still think that almost all young people spend too much time with electronic media. I would recommend that you consider having certain times of the day when your children are required to disconnect from electronic media. You know, for decades, I have been talking about the media storm that surrounds our children and grandchildren. This survey of our kids' digital day shows that they are in the midst of a greater storm than we have ever imagined. This should concern parents and educators. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Joe Smerrick with us today as we talk about his book, Immigration, a politically incorrect guide to immigration, an American First Manifesto, and it is published by Regner. You can probably find it in your local bookstore, but we also have a link on our website, pointofview.net. We'll take some of your phone calls in just a minute, 1-800-351-1212. But, John, let me, if I can, for just a minute, talk about cost. One of the big questions that people ask all the time is, well, how much is a wall going to cost? Have you run the numbers on that to have some idea?
Oh, yeah, actually. Let me turn to that part of the book. Actually, first let's talk about the welfare that they cost, okay?
Oh, sure.
Let's talk about what it already costs us to have the immigrants here.
Okay. And you got that about $116 billion, I think, is the number I remember. Go ahead.
Yeah. In 2012, 51% of households headed by any immigrant, legal or illegal, used at least one welfare program. 51%, compared to 30% of native households. Of households headed by immigrants who've been in the country for more than 20 years, 48% still access welfare. Immigrant households use food stamps at a much higher level than natives, 40% versus 22%. They use Medicaid by 42% instead of 23%. And the highest use of welfare is immigrants from Central America and Mexico. 73% of households with immigrants from those regions use welfare, compared to 51% from the Caribbean and 48% from Africa. Only 17% of people from South Asia use welfare. It's quite overwhelming. The average household headed by an immigrant, illegal or illegal, costs $6,234 in welfare benefits. That's 41% higher than the average native household. They receive 1/3 more cash welfare, 57% more food assistance, 44% more Medicaid. So this really adds up. This really builds up. The net fiscal drain per illegal immigrant, according to the National Academies of Science, is $75,000. The average illegal immigrant costs us $75,000. But then that's only the original illegal immigrants. If you then add in their descendants, it goes up to $94,000 per illegal immigrant. If the border wall prevented between 160,000 and 200,000 illegal crossings, it would pay for the $12 to $15 billion cost of the wall in just 10 years. 10 years of what we would save on just welfare and Medicaid for immigrants, especially illegal immigrants, we would in 10 years, the wall would be paid off.
You are writing as a Catholic, and your co-author, Al, is writing as an evangelical. How do you think about some of this from a Christian point of view? Because that's a question I get quite often, and I know you address that in the book as well.
Yeah, I don't think we should be advocating policies based on our religious beliefs directly. I wouldn't want to see it illegal to serve fish on Fridays in Lent. And I don't think my evangelical friend would want to ban dancing. Well, if his church objects, I don't think they do, but some churches object to dancing. I don't think they want to see it outlawed. We don't make public policy based on what is specific to our church. We make it based on abstract principles of justice that any citizen, believer or not, could agree on just using reason. It's theocratic. It's kind of like Islamic Sharia to try to say, oh, we're going to set this immigration policy because we're Christians and we're going to impose Christian policies on all the citizens, Jewish, Muslim, atheist alike. So I reject the idea that there's a Christian immigration policy that we have any right to impose using the force of law in a country with a separation of church and state. I do think as Christians we should care about helping the poor and the needy. And the way you do that is you respect the law, you obey the law. You don't provide sanctuary to illegal immigrants, as some Catholic churches do. You don't lobby to change immigration laws just to suit your religious belief. But once the people are here legally, you help them. You have programs teaching English in your schools, in your churches. You teach them English. You teach them job skills. You maybe have a food bank for them. You don't become a government contractor dispensing entitlement programs to these immigrants. That's not Christian charity. Planned Parenthood is a government contractor. When Catholic Charities, for instance, become the government contractor dispensing taxpayer money, it's not really a charity anymore. It's a business. It's a nonprofit business.
Again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let's take a phone call or two and go to California, KYCC. Larissa, thank you for calling today.
Hi there. I sure hope I don't get cut off. I'm in a bad spot. I
think we just got...
shoot.
Okay, go ahead.
You can't hear me. Can you hear me okay?
Sort of. Go ahead. Ask your question real quickly.
Sorry. I don't understand the whole point in the conversation. Jesus is coming back soon, and what's done is done. I can't see where any of these policies or ideas are going to change anything. I don't get it.
Okay, so again, is there any point, is it too late, maybe whether you tie it into the return of Christ or not, have we gone too far down the road, John Smirek?
I don't think you make policies based on the theory that the world might end soon. Jesus said you don't know the day or the hour. You know, imagine if the first Christians had just said, well, Jesus is coming soon. Well, guess we don't have to preach the gospel because the world's going to end. I guess we don't have to recopy the books of the ancient world so that they can be read in the future because the world is ending. We're supposed to pray as if everything depended on God and act as if everything depended on us. And that's the proper balance of faith and action. We have to try to preserve an orderly, decent country for our children and our grandchildren, just like the country that was given to us. We should not give our children a worse country than we inherited from our parents. That's kind of disgraceful. And we're doing that. And one of the ways we're doing that is by letting our borders be a lawless zone controlled by drug cartels in Mexico, by letting radical Muslims resettle here and open mosques and practice polygamy and go on public assistance to support their polygamous families while promoting Sharia law for the United States of America. That's not what our parents did to us, and it's not what we should do to our children.
Let's go back to the phones. David in South Carolina, you're on with John Smirek as we talk about his book, A Politically Incorrect Guide to Immigration. Thank you, David. What's your comment?
Oh, thank you for taking my call. I'm really in support of doing anything to help our nation and to help people, but I can't for the life of me figure out why is it every time we have to hammer the immigrants, we talk about them being illegal. Why don't we ever focus on the illegal employment practices, the illegal exploitative role of corporations bringing in these people and sucking cheap labor out of them? Why isn't that a focus of law and order? Why do we always have to vilify people who are just trying to live and find a better place to have a family? Thank you.
Okay, what about some of the policies? You know, that's one of the reasons we have what we have.
I agree with him.
Yeah, go ahead.
I agree with him completely that the employers need to be held accountable. I think employers who use illegal immigrants should do jail time, not fines, jail time. If it's just fines, they'll see it as a cost of doing business. I completely agree with the caller. We do need to focus on the employers who exploit these workers and who refuse to hire native workers, and who, in the case of places like Walmart, when they get injured, they send them to emergency wards to be taken care of by the taxpayer. I don't blame the immigrant who got injured in unsafe working conditions. I blame the factory owner who's using illegal immigrants so that he doesn't have to pass safety inspections, so he doesn't have to deal with a labor union, so he doesn't have to deal with it. He doesn't have to negotiate with them over the salary because he can just threaten to have them deported. We have created a kind of late 19th century robber baron economy where American workers, if they can get jobs, are protected by health and safety regulations and minimum wage. And then there's a shadow economy that operates illegally on a huge scale across the country where illegal workers who live in fear are exploited by employers who laugh all the way to the bank. And that's why we haven't been able to fix immigration. It's not just because the Democrats want cheap votes. A lot of Republicans want cheap labor, and they're in the pockets of corporations that depend on the cheap labor. George Borjas is a Harvard economist. His parents were Cuban immigrants. He documented that immigration as a whole adds very little to our economy, but what it does do, it transfers wealth. It vacuums up wealth from the working class and transfers it to the stockholders of corporations that use cheap labor.
Well, let's take a break, and we'll continue our conversation with John Smirek. If you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Also talked about, looking at that from a Christian point of view. But when we come back, I want to get into the whole question of, there were a lot of Muslims that were allowed in as those who were seeking amnesty. But what about some of the Arab Christians, the Yazidis, a variety of others? And he talks about that in his book as well in the chapter on the problem with Islam. So we'll get into that as well. And, of course, give you a chance to join the conversation as we go to a break. Again, we're asking you to even consider what you might do to share your story, because we'd love to hear how Point of View has had an influence in your life. Let's take a break, and we will continue our conversation and our discussion about immigration with John Smirek right after this.
Every big story in human history began with one person. Point of View Radio has sparked many stories during the past 5 decades.
I'm 25 years old, and I've been listening to Point of View for about 12 years now.
I can't say enough about how it's touched my life and changed me completely.
The effect was incredible, and it was immediate.
I mean, I've seen Congress turn around.
There was a transformation that really did take place.
Oh, you missed your cue. This is where your story belongs. How has Point of View made a difference in your life and your community? We want to hear your story, and when you share it, you'll automatically be entered in a drawing for an iPad mini, and if we share your story to inspire others, we'll send you a Bible stick, an audio New Testament that you can take anywhere. So tell us your story before June 1st at pointofview.net/story, or call 1-855-335-2100. You could win an iPad mini, and your story may encourage someone else to make a difference. 855-335-2100 and pointofview.net/story. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. John Smirek with us. He's the co-author of the new book, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Immigration. Just lots of facts and figures in there. And John, just before we take some phone calls, one of the questions that I raised just a minute ago was when we talk about Islam, we're allowing a lot of Muslims to come in, but there almost seemed to be for a while when we talked about providing amnesty or for some of the refugees and almost an anti-Christian bias where we were allowing Muslims to come in, but Arab Christians, Copts, Yazidis, and others oftentimes were not brought in. Have you addressed that? It seems to me that that's another very important issue in this immigration debate.
Yeah, let's separate that from amnesty. That has to do with illegal immigrants. Refugees are people who come here and apply for legal status because of persecution.
Right.
Supposedly, a refugee is someone who leaves a country where he's being persecuted for his religion or his ethnicity. He's supposed to go to the first safe country where he's not going to be persecuted, and he's supposed to stay there. That's international law. There is no reason on earth why we are taking people from a Sunni Muslim country like Somalia, flying them over 15 other Sunni Muslim countries where they'd be perfectly safe, and resettling them in Bangor, Maine, or Lewiston, Maine. That's just complete insanity. That's the pursuit of diversity and multiculturalism for its own sake. And it's vastly more expensive than resettling them close to home or trying to help them find someplace, so that they can maybe return home when the fighting stops. As it is, it's just another stealth form of immigration to bring in diversity for its own sake. I would make an exception, though. In the case of Arab Christians, there is no safe place for them in many cases because we've allowed the Middle East to become almost a Christian-free zone. So it might be true that an Arab Christian needs to come to Michigan because there's no safe place for him in the Middle East. That's not true of any Sunni Muslim in the world. There's no reason why we should be taking thousands of Muslim refugees from across the world, spending tens of thousands of dollars to transport them from Sudan or Tunisia to Indiana or Ohio when they could go from Tunisia to Morocco, or they could go from Sudan to Chad. It's just complete absurdity, a huge waste of money that could be spent, drilling wells for people and providing them with healthy water. It could be spent actually helping the countries that they're from or helping refugees in the region. Instead, it's an elaborate boondoggle. And under the Obama administration, it discriminated very heavily against Christians. One of the reasons for that is the Muslims control the refugee camps. So, like the Iraqi Christians, and I'm in touch with Iraqi Christian leaders, the Iraqi Christians who were displaced by ISIS, escaped with their lives, they would go to a refugee camp. It would be run by Sunni Muslims who wouldn't let them in. So the Christians couldn't even get to the UN to apply for refugee status.
Right, that's right. Well, again, I just wanted to bring some of that up. We've talked about some of that before, but again, your book goes into that in more detail. Let's continue taking phone calls before the end of the program. In Georgia, WAGP, Larry, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a comment that having worked for a company where I traveled into other countries, I was required to give an employer that would be paying my wages while I was there. And it seems to me like every time I hear this brought up, it's as though people are saying we're barring people from coming into this. We have immigration rules and laws in place, and we're not asking anyone to do anything that other countries aren't asking the same thing. And I just feel like it's a travesty to put us into a situation where we're a big evil country that don't allow people to come in when no country allows people to come in and expend all their resources.
Well, again, I've talked about this, John, that if you just look at some of the requirements, if you wanted to go to Mexico or a variety of other countries, there are requirements that we don't put upon individuals coming to this country.
That's absolutely the case. Mexico, until a few years ago, used to shoot illegal immigrants to kill at its border, in the southern border. Now, I don't endorse that. I don't want to imitate that. I'm just pointing out the hypocrisy The Mexican government, while it was shooting El Salvadorans trying to get into Mexico, was screaming that America oppressed Mexicans who snuck illegally into the United States, when all we did was humanely detain them and return them across the border. The outrageous hypocrisy and double standards are shocking, and all it does take is an honest look at the question, which we try to provide in the Politically Incorrect Guide to Immigration.
Let's go to South Carolina. John, you're on with John Smerick. What would you like to add to our conversation today?
Yes. First, as a Christian, I pray for Christians not to be naive, because if you read the entire Bible, we all going to be pruned. Sin, God don't overlook sin. So we are being set up for pruning in this country of our own doings because we're not enforcing laws. With that said, I don't even know Republicans or Democrats concerned about what the voters want. And with that said, I've paid in Social Security, penalties and fines, paid Medicaid for 35 years. And now they want to cut them programs back so they can take on more illegals. And that makes the working people class where we at will be lowered standards. And so we already are really a socialist country because we're not obeying the laws, and they want us to sacrifice more for people that will come in and get benefits and don't work for 5 years. But I think it's wrong because, like I said, most Americans put in what the law tells them to do. Work 30 years, you get a retirement. But all that's going to get taken from us if we continue to get out of our budget. And entitlements are already over $30 trillion that they don't want to talk about. And then we borrowed $20 trillion. So I don't think we're going to sustain this.
We did talk a little bit with Dan Seeley about, of course, the national debt, but he's talking about entitlements and what's happened in the middle class. John, what are your thoughts?
Oh, no, it's disastrous. And you'll see that there are companies in China that help Chinese people and Chinese immigrants to the U.S. bring their elderly parents who never paid into Social Security. They help them come to live in America and collect American Social Security without ever having paid into it. It's a huge scam, and we obviously can't afford this. It's not solving itself. All these new workers, supposedly, and these immigrants are supposed to pay into the system. Well, a lot of them are working illegally, so they're not paying, and also a lot of them are just earning very low wages. So they're not contributing that much to the system, but they're all going to be here to collect it. It's a pyramid scheme that's going to collapse. And illegal immigration or even large-scale unskilled immigration is doing absolutely nothing to make it any better.
Let's take another phone call. We'll go to Georgia on the Good News Network. Daphne, what's your point of view today?
My point of view is I just want to ask the writer of the book is how are the immigrants draining the Social Security or the benefits from the government when they can't even contribute to it. They can't even pay into it because they don't have Social Security number. They can't contribute into it. So how are they doing it? They can't even collect it. So I want him to be truthful and not just generalize and say they were draining it. I'm an immigrant myself. So I know these things, and I've been through the system. So I don't want him to generalize and say, oh, these immigrants, illegal or legal, are draining the system. And I just heard him talk about the Chinese. He just talked about the Chinese people who bring in the elderly parents. They can't collect Social Security. They don't have a Social Security number yet. And even if they do, they have to prove that they worked for it.
Okay, what about that? I mean, again, if you haven't put in your number of quarters, how do you collect Social Security? How do they work that out?
I think probably through disability. I mean, this is not something we go into in detail in the book. It would have required some research, but and it wasn't one of the major topics. What I was saying was that bringing in large numbers of immigrants is not going to solve the Social Security problem. Okay. Some people say, oh, we just need more numbers to pay into the Social Security system. And immigration is the solution because we're not having enough kids. And that immigration is not the solution to that. That's the thing I want to emphasize. In terms of public benefits, illegal immigrants are able to go to emergency wards and be taken care of. And in fact, if you go to a public emergency ward, you're going to wait online behind a lot of people who are not here legally, and your bill is going to be a lot higher because you're paying for that. They don't even get Medicaid. These people don't even have any means of identification. In terms of Social Security, One massive problem is identity theft. Illegal immigrants using American Social Security numbers in order to work at companies. And that messes up the retirement and the credit reports, and it can result in identity theft. For tens of thousands of Americans are suffering from that. It's simply chaotic to have 10 million people here in a shadow economy living, without identification a lot of them on false Social Security numbers. It just doesn't make any kind of sense. I was not saying that legal immigrants are disrupting the system. I was simply saying it's not a solution to our entitlements crisis.
Let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation as we talk about the politically incorrect guide to immigration with John Smerick. All that coming up right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Lieutenant Junior Grade Aloysius H. Schmidt was a Catholic priest better known as Father Schmidt. Originally from St. Lucas, Iowa, Father Schmidt was aboard the USS Oklahoma on December 7, 1941, as the battleship was torpedoed in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Father Schmidt had just led Mass that infamous Sunday morning when the ship carrying 1,300 souls was attacked. Father Schmidt posthumously received the Navy and Marine Corps Medal for Heroism. According to the citation, Father Schmidt realized only a few men could escape through a small hatch. He insisted that others go ahead of him. He remained behind, pronouncing a blessing on the men while they crawled out to safety. 75 years later, Father Schmidt's remains have been positively identified and appropriately honored. Many men and women are heroes, but Father Schmidt's selfless act for his sailors is born more from care for their souls than of valor. As I consider his heroism, I'm reminded that there is an effort underway to rid chaplains like Father Schmidt from our military. That can never be. Our military has welcomed the chaplaincy corps from its inception because one's right to religious liberty is not surrendered at basic training. First Liberty defends chaplains like Father Schmidt who would voluntarily trade a rifle for a Bible in service to their comrades in arms. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. You can protect your religious freedom by going to firstliberty.org to download your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit. Our attorneys created kits for churches, ministries, Christian schools, military members, students, and teachers, and the workplace. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
John Smerick with us for a few more minutes as we talk about his book, Politically Incorrect Guide to Immigration. And one of the things that probably is in the back of your mind, or maybe the front of your mind right now, is, okay, you've identified the problems. What are the solutions? And one of the things that they have put in this book is called Mission America. Mission stands for Managing Immigration to Strengthen and Secure Our Nation. And so he's got 15 different ideas. And so, John, I thought I'd rattle off just a couple and see if any of those were ones you want to address. Sure. Number one was build the wall. Number two, track those who enter the United States on visas and immediately remove those who overstay them, because that's about 40%. Strip sanctuary cities of discretionary funding.
Let's hold on. Let's just go into that one.
Yeah, okay.
The overstaying the visas. 40% of illegal immigrants, including most of the hijackers on 9/11 who flew the plane into the World Trade Center. We have been enforcing our immigration laws, and they wouldn't have been here. We would still have the World Trade Center. Those 3,000 people would still be alive. We would not have invaded Iraq. We would not have spent $1 trillion on that war. It just go on and on. Think of all the crazy consequences that happen when there are people roaming around your country illegally who overstayed their visas. They know they're illegal. You know, they're obviously in violation of the law, but we're not enforcing the law.
Yes.
No wonder it's amazing we haven't had a lot more terrorism than we have.
Well, again, that's just the second point. Let me take a third one. Strip sanctuary cities of discretionary federal funding and use other means to exert pressure on them. That's one of the things the Trump administration has been talking about doing and trying to do as well. True?
Absolutely. If you want to be a sanctuary city, you should pay the price.
We talked earlier, as we talked about some of the employers, I think it was David that called in this one, check the right of new applicants to work legally in America using E-Verify, which must be mandatory for every business with 5 or more employees. If we used E-Verify, we would recognize that would end some of the criminal practices or unethical practices, however you want to look at it, of some of these corporations, wouldn't it?
Oh, completely. And I'm also in favor of mandating jail time for repeat offenders who employ illegal immigrants. I don't want to put the immigrants in prison. I just want to send them home. The employers who keep exploiting them deserve to be doing serious jail time.
So again, some of the others that you talked about here, pass a federal law that ends birthright citizenship, or, of course, you also have chain migration. Even around this table, John, we'll have individuals saying, well, I think the 14th Amendment really requires that anybody who is born here is automatically a citizen. I'm not so convinced of that, but I can't even convince my fellow conservatives that isn't true. So you almost do have to pass a law or get some kind of ruling, because even some of my fellow conservatives think you should have birthright citizenship, and I'm not sure the 14th Amendment was intended to use that way. Go ahead.
It was definitely not intended to be used that way. It says someone who was born here and under the jurisdiction of the United States. So if the ambassador of Somalia's wife gives birth in the Somali embassy, she doesn't get U.S. citizenship. That's currently the case because they were clearly under a foreign jurisdiction. A federal law that passed that said foreign citizens who are here illegally who give birth to a child are not under our jurisdiction, and therefore they are not citizens. I think that law would pass constitutional muster. It's certainly worth passing it and seeing what the Supreme Court has to say.
Well, again, it depends on getting the right justices on the Supreme Court, because you've had kind of a tradition now that says if you're born here, you're a citizen. And, of course, also if you can get your foot on dry ground, you can be accepted as a refugee. So we've got to turn some policies around here if we really want to begin to implement some of the kinds of things you're talking about in the book, don't we?
Right, but I think the most important ones are build a wall, E-Verify, track people overstay their visas. Do those 3 things, 90% of the problem goes away.
And you do talk about some others, like fix legal immigration. We've talked about that, and looking at some of the immigration admissions, the H-1V and those kinds of things. So there's a lot. There's 15 points. I'm not even going to go through all of those, but I think if people buy the book, first of all, they're going to see that you not only can identify some significant problems, but also have a whole section that has really sort of, if you will, marching orders. And, John, as we're coming to the end, it seems to me that these are the kind of questions we should be asking right now. There are people looking for our vote. Some of our listeners are in states that have yet to have primaries. All of us have a chance to vote in November. And I would want to have a book like this or other resources in my hand to ask, well, what do you plan to do about the issue of immigration? What do you think about these particular policies? And those are the questions we should be asking right now in some of these town hall meetings and some of these candidate forums, don't you think?
Oh, yeah, and right now, the U.S. House of Representatives, the Democrats are trying to get enough Republicans to sign off on a massive amnesty. And it might happen behind, under closed doors in the cover of night. In fact, Congressman Dave Bratt is leading the charge against it. And I'm just compiling questions. I'm doing an email interview with Congressman Brad that will appear tomorrow at stream.org, going into these things. The chief labor lobby and the Democrats who want new votes are relentless. They will keep pushing and pushing and pushing any opportunity they can to flood our country with low-skill immigrants, likely to go on welfare, likely to vote for Democrats. We have to stop them, and it's going to be an ongoing process.
Might mention, too, you have a section, which I love creatively, entitled How to Sell Reality to People Allergic to Facts. And you've got a section here on 5 tips for explaining immigration issues to the open-minded but underinformed, winsome approaches to try on the initially hostile or worried, 20 questions asked in all sincerity. It does seem to me that this is certainly something that you could not only use if you talk to a member of Congress, but it's something you can use as you're just having conversations with individuals about this issue of immigration.
Absolutely. I mean, we've got kind of canned tweets. You can just take our points and tweet them out to help raise people's awareness and get them thinking about the issue. Because if they're thinking about the issue, we win. If they're not thinking about the issue, the cheap labor lobby and the Democrats who want to pack the voters' rolls with uninformed new immigrants, they win.
So, again, you can contact John Smierick at The Stream. And, of course, we encourage you to go there to find very good articles that are written every day, not only by him, but by a variety of individuals. And we post so many of them on our website. If you'd like to know more about this book, again, you probably can find it in your local bookstore. I found these politically incorrect guides in a lot of those, but we also have an online link. So, John, what would you like to say before we say goodbye today?
I would just say I'm grateful to America for letting my family come here legally, and I think part of paying it forward is keeping an orderly, decent country that enforces its laws and looks out for the working class, and that's why I care about this issue.
Well, again, thank you so very much for writing the book, and thank you for giving us an hour here on Point of View. Just before we run out of time, again, we have that information on the book. We have information about Dan Celia, and, of course, all of it available on our website, pointofview.net. Let me just mention that one of the things we've announced today is we're looking for some of you to share your stories. We've already, I think, received 1 or 2 already during the broadcast, but, of course, as we go off the air, that would be a time in which you could visit our website, which is pointofview.net. You can go to pointofview.net/story or simply go to the banner that is there. Or, of course, we have a toll-free number, so if you want to write this down, I'll give it to you in just a minute. But we recognize that some of you have stories to say and stories to tell about the impact that Point of View has had on your life. And we would love to share those with others. So, again, we're encouraging you to share those. You can visit the website or leave a voicemail message at 855-335-2100. And, again, we'd love to hear your story. And as a thank you, we'll be glad to send you, for those of you that leave a story, our Bible stick as a thank you. And also we'll enter you in a drawing for an iPad mini. So, again, if you've appreciated Point of View, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to share it with others. Thank you for joining us today. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for the help behind the scenes. We'll see you tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.